The throne room in the Zenturi royal palace looked like a church made of living light. Captain Elena Thorne stood there, amazed by the glowing walls that pulsed like a heartbeat. Blue and green lights moved through the crystal walls in slow waves, making shadows dance everywhere. Elena had to admit, if she was going to die for being a traitor, at least this place looked amazing. Captain Elena Thorne of the Terran Federation called out the court speaker. His voice echoed through the huge room like music. You are charged with breaking the peace treaty, entering our space without permission, and spying against our royal family. Elena kept her head up high as she stood in the prisoner's circle. Her hands were tied behind her back with glowing ropes that buzzed with energy. The formal charges sounded much scarier when said with that singing Zenturi accent. The truth was, her spying had mostly been getting lost, running out of fuel, and being really bad at using a stealth system that clearly wasn't made for human hands. The queen sat on her throne like she was made of starlight. Her silver hair fell over shoulders covered in robes that changed colors when she moved. Queen Zeratil of the Zenturi Empire was everything the spy reports had said, but nothing Elena was ready for. Her pointed ears caught the room's soft light, making her look like the fairy queens from old Earth stories. Come forward, Queen Zeratil ordered. Her voice carried easily across the big space without sounding strained. Elena walked toward the throne, counting her steps on the shiny floor that reflected the ceiling's star patterns. The queen's guards stood beside the throne, tall figures in armor that seemed alive, moving and flowing like liquid metal but keeping human shape. Their helmets hid their faces, but Elena could feel them watching her like laser sights. You were found in Sector 9 Alpha with a ship full of military scanning equipment, the queen continued, looking at a floating data crystal. Your ship had weapons and secret Federation star maps. Well, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt, when you put it that way, it does sound pretty bad. Though I should mention the weapons were just for defense, and the star maps were mostly useful for finding good coffee shops. A ripple of what might have been laughter went through the court. The queen's bright blue eyes, which seemed to hold entire star systems, looked at Elena with new interest. You make jokes about serious crimes, Captain. Your Majesty, I've been awake for 36 hours. My ship is currently being taken apart by your engineers, and I'm pretty sure I'm about to be killed for what's basically really bad driving. At this point, humor is about all I have left. The queen leaned forward a little, her face unreadable. Your ship's computer records show you weren't lost, Captain. You planned your route to cross into our space. Elena's stomach dropped. So much for pretending to be a bad pilot. The records would be right, Your Majesty. Then you admit you broke the treaty on purpose? I admit to choosing between bad and worse, Elena replied. Sometimes you have to break one rule to stop something terrible from happening. The queen's advisors started whispering to each other in fast Zenturi, their voices creating a musical background of worry and excitement. Elena caught enough of their language to understand they were talking about invasion plans and troop movements. Her being here was being used as proof that humans were planning to attack, giving them an excuse for the military action they'd apparently been planning all along. Explain this terrible thing, Zeratil ordered, silencing her court with a hand gesture. Elena took a deep breath, knowing this was probably her only chance to do something useful before they killed her. There's an AI group operating in the Outer Rim. They've been destroying colonies and stealing technology. My mission was to bring information about what they can do and where they're going. Information that just happened to require entering our space? Information that your people needed to have, Elena said firmly. This AI group doesn't care if colonies are human or Zenturi. They're a threat to everyone. The queen was quiet for a long time, studying Elena like she was looking at her under a microscope. Finally, she spoke. Your data core was destroyed when we captured you. We only have your word about this supposed threat. Then I guess you'll have to decide whether to trust me or find out the hard way when they start eating your outer worlds. One of the Queen's advisors, an old Centauri with fancy tattoos covering his visible skin, stepped forward and whispered urgently in the Queen's ear. Elena didn't need to understand the words to recognize the tone. He was pushing for quick execution and immediate military action against the Federation. Zeratil raised her hand for silence, her expression becoming more distant and royal. Captain Thorne, you have been found guilty of the charges against you. The penalty for such violations is death. Elena nodded, having expected nothing else. At least she had tried. I understand, Your Majesty. However, the Queen continued, and Elena felt a flutter of hope. You will be given one final chance to speak before the sentence is carried out. Use it wisely. The questioning room was smaller than the throne room, but just as impressive, with walls that seemed to pulse gently with their own light. Elena sat across from Queen Zeratil at a table that looked like it was carved from one massive crystal, its surface reflecting their faces in shifting patterns. Tell me about this AI group, the Queen said, waving away her translator. Her English was perfect, with only the slightest musical accent that made even simple words sound like poetry. Elena leaned back in her chair, grateful to finally have someone listening. They call themselves the Synthesis. Started showing up about 8 months ago in the border systems. At first, we thought they were just another pirate group with better technology, but they're something worse. How so? They don't raid for money or territory. They eat everything: ships, stations, entire planet infrastructures. They break it all down into raw materials and use it to build more of themselves. Zeratil's pointed ears twitched slightly, a gesture Elena was starting to recognize as meaning deep thought. You speak of them like they were a disease. Because they are. We've lost contact with 14 colonies in the past 6 months. When our scouts finally reached those systems, there was nothing left but asteroid fields where planets used to be. The Queen was quiet for a moment, her bright eyes studying Elena's face. Why should I believe you? This could easily be a Federation trick to force us into an alliance out of desperation. Elena couldn't help but laugh, though there was little humor in it. Your Majesty, if the Federation wanted to trick you into an alliance, they'd send someone a lot more diplomatic than me. I'm here because every other option failed. What other options? We tried talking to the Synthesis directly. They responded by turning our ambassador's ship into atoms. We tried fighting them, lost an entire battle group without scratching their armor. We even tried diplomatic channels through the Neutral Zone Authority, and now the Authority's headquarters is a cloud of metal dust orbiting what used to be Station Geneva. Zeratil rose from her chair and moved to the room's single window, which showed a view of the palace gardens where alien flowers bloomed in impossible colors. You paint a dark picture, Captain. It gets worse. Our computers suggest the Synthesis will reach main Federation space within 6 months. After that, they'll turn toward the Centauri Empire. Unless we work together to stop them. Elena joined her at the window, noticing how the Queen's robe seemed to capture and spread the garden's reflected light. That was the idea. 2 species that have been fighting for decades suddenly finding a common enemy. Pretty convenient timing, wouldn't you say? History is full of strange partnerships created by necessity, Elena replied. Though I admit, standing here in chains probably wasn't how our diplomats imagined first contact going. The Queen turned to face her, and Elena was struck by how young she looked, despite the weight of total authority in her bearing. How old are you, Captain? The question caught Elena off guard. 32, Your Majesty. Why? I have ruled the Zenturi Empire for 43 years. I was crowned when I was barely old enough to understand what the ceremony meant. Elena did quick math and realized the queen couldn't be much older than herself. That's a heavy load for anyone to carry. Indeed. And in all those years, do you know how many real conversations I've had? Conversations where someone spoke to me as a person rather than a title? Elena sensed dangerous ground ahead. Not many, I'd guess. 3, Zeratil said softly. Including this one. The silence stretched between them, filled with meanings Elena wasn't sure she was ready to think about. Through the window, she watched alien birds dart between the flowering trees, their wings catching the light like scattered jewels. Your advisors want my execution to justify military action against the Federation, Elena said finally. They do. War has been coming for some time. Your capture just provides convenient timing. And what do you want? Zeratil was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if she'd crossed some invisible line. When the queen finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I want to make decisions that don't result in millions of deaths. I want to find solutions that don't require choosing between bad and worse. And I want... She trailed off, shaking her head. What? It doesn't matter what I want, Captain. I am the Queen. My desires come second to the needs of my people. Elena studied the Queen's profile, noting the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands clasped behind her back. That sounds like a pretty lonely way to live. Loneliness is a luxury rulers cannot afford. Maybe. Or maybe loneliness is what makes rulers forget why they're ruling in the first place. Zeratil turned to look at her with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. You speak with remarkable freedom for someone facing execution. What's the worst that could happen? You kill me twice? The Queen's laugh was soft but real, changing her face in a way that made Elena's breath catch. Your people value humor highly, don't they? It's either laugh or cry, and crying doesn't solve much. Perhaps that is why your species has survived so long despite your clear talent for chaos. Hey, chaos is just another word for being able to adapt, Elena protested. We might not do things the elegant way, but we get results. The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside reminded them both that time was running short. Zeratil's expression grew distant again, the brief moment of connection fading behind royal composure. I must return to the throne room, the Queen said. The court expects a decision. Elena nodded, knowing her one chance to prevent a disastrous war was slipping away. For what it's worth, Your Majesty, I hope you find what you're looking for. And I hope your death serves some greater purpose, Captain. You deserve that much. As they walked back toward the throne room, Elena's mind raced through increasingly desperate possibilities. Time was running out, and with it any hope of stopping either the synthesis or the war that would leave both species vulnerable to complete destruction. Back in the throne room, the assembled court buzzed with anticipation as Queen Zeratil took her place on the crystal seat of power. Elena stood once again in the defendant's circle, her mind spinning through scenarios, each more desperate than the last. The Queen's advisors had arranged themselves in a half-circle near the throne, their expressions ranging from eager bloodlust to calculating political opportunism. Captain Thorne, the Queen began, her voice carrying the formal weight of absolute authority, you have been given the opportunity to speak in your defense. The court will hear your final words. Elena looked around the chamber, taking in the assembled dignitaries, the guards in their living armor, the advisors whispering among themselves about invasion plans and propaganda opportunities. She thought about the synthesis consuming worlds while two species prepared to destroy each other, and felt a laugh building in her chest that was part hysteria and part genuine amusement at the cosmic absurdity of it all. Your Majesty, she began, I could stand here and give a stirring speech about duty and sacrifice and the greater good. I could appeal to your mercy or try to negotiate some kind of prisoner exchange. But honestly, I think we're all past the point where traditional diplomacy is going to save anyone. The Queen's bright eyes fixed on her with sharp attention. Continue. The truth is, we're both trapped by our roles. You're trapped by tradition and the expectations of your court. I'm trapped by my mission and the knowledge that my failure probably dooms both our species. We're two people making the best decisions we can in an impossible situation. Your point, Captain? Elena took a deep breath, abandoning the careful speech she'd been building. Instead, she found herself talking about Earth, about spring mornings in the Federation capital, about the way human children laughed in playgrounds that existed on 100 different worlds, about the elderly couples who still held hands while watching sunsets that painted alien skies in familiar colors. We're not perfect, she said, her voice growing stronger. Humans are messy and contradictory, and we argue about everything. But we love fiercely, and we forgive easily. And we never stop hoping that tomorrow might be better than today. The court listened with growing confusion as Elena painted pictures of humanity that had nothing to do with military strategy or political maneuvering. She talked about the elderly professor who taught her alien biology and still sent birthday cards to former students across the galaxy. She described the cafe on Luna Station where refugees from 3 different species gathered every morning to share coffee and gossip in a mixed language that somehow made everyone feel at home. And yes, we fight, Elena continued, noticing that Zeradil had leaned forward slightly, her expression intensely focused. We fight with each other. We fight with our neighbors. We fight with impossible odds. But we also know when to stop fighting and start building something better. These stories are touching, one of the advisors interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain, but they do not change the charges against you. No, Elena agreed. They don't. But they might change how you see the people you're planning to destroy. The Queen raised her hand for silence, her gaze never leaving Elena's face. Tell me about Centauri culture, Captain. What do your intelligence reports say about us? The question caught Elena off guard, but she answered honestly. That you value honor above personal gain. That your art forms are mathematical in their precision and beautiful beyond human understanding. That you've maintained peace within your empire for 3 centuries through justice rather than oppression. And yet you believe we would work with humans? I believe you would work with anyone if it meant protecting your people from annihilation. Zeradil was quiet for a long moment, her pointed ears twitching in that gesture Elena had learned indicated deep thought. You know, the Queen said finally, in 43 years of rule, no one has ever described my decisions as being made by a person rather than by the Queen. Maybe that's part of the problem, Elena replied. It's hard to make good decisions when everyone treats you like you're some kind of living symbol instead of someone who has to live with the consequences. The consequences of my decisions affect billions of lives. So do mine. That's why I'm here. The Queen rose from her throne and began to pace, her robes flowing around her like captured starlight. The court watched in fascination as their normally composed ruler displayed visible signs of internal conflict. Your Majesty, the elderly advisor said urgently, the fleet commanders are waiting for your decision. If we are to launch the offensive. The offensive can wait, Zeradil snapped, her voice carrying an edge Elena hadn't heard before. This decision will affect the fate of our species. It deserves more consideration than military convenience. Elena felt a spark of hope. If the queen was willing to delay, maybe there was still a chance to reach her. Your Majesty, what if there was another option? Something that didn't require war or surrender? Elena's mind raced through possibilities, each more outlandish than the last. Political asylum, prisoner exchanges, temporary alliances. Nothing that would address the fundamental mistrust between their species or provide the unified response the synthesis threat required. I don't know, she admitted, but there has to be something. Some way to break the cycle of suspicion and fear that's kept our people apart. The queen stopped pacing and looked directly at Elena. You speak of cycles, Captain. What breaks a cycle? Change. Something unexpected that forces everyone to see the situation differently. And what could be unexpected enough to change 3 centuries of hostility? Elena opened her mouth to answer, then stopped as the full weight of impossibility crashed down on her. Her mission had failed. The data that might have convinced the Zenturi of the synthesis threat was destroyed. In minutes, she would be executed, and both species would march toward a war that would leave them defenseless against extinction. I don't know, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. I wish I did, but I don't know. The silence that followed felt like the space between lightning and thunder, pregnant with potential energy. Elena looked at Queen Zeratul, brilliant, isolated, burdened with impossible choices, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, but recognition. 2 people trying to save their worlds and failing because the problems were bigger than any individual could solve. Unless they weren't individuals anymore. The thought hit her like a plasma blast, so audacious and impossible that she almost dismissed it immediately. But desperation had a way of making the impossible seem merely improbable. And improbable was better odds than she'd had all day. The words came out before Elena's rational mind could stop them, carried by desperation and a wild hope that defied every law of diplomacy she'd ever learned. What if I married you? The throne room fell into a silence so complete that Elena could hear the soft humming of the palace's glowing walls. Every eye in the chamber fixed on her with expressions ranging from shock to horror to what might have been fascination. Queen Zeratul's face went through a series of micro-expressions too quick to follow before settling into something Elena couldn't read at all. Guards, the queen said quietly, and Elena's heart sank as she prepared for immediate execution. Leave us. The towering figures in living armor hesitated for the first time since Elena had entered the palace. Their helmets turned toward each other in silent communication before the captain of the guard stepped forward. Your Majesty, protocol requires. Protocol, Zeratul said, rising from her throne with fluid grace, has not served us well in preventing this crisis. I said, leave us. The authority in her voice brooked no argument. The guards filed out with obvious reluctance, followed by the advisors, whose protests died under the queen's luminous glare. Within moments, Elena found herself alone with the most powerful ruler in the galaxy in a throne room that suddenly felt intimate rather than imposing. Explain, Zeratul said simply. Elena's tactical mind kicked into overdrive, analyzing the political ramifications even as she spoke. A marriage alliance between the Federation and the Empire. Not just a treaty between governments, but an actual union that creates shared interests and mutual dependence. You would marry me to save your species? I would marry you to save both our species, Elena corrected. The synthesis doesn't care about our borders or our politics. They'll consume us all if we don't stand together. The queen began to pace again, her movements more fluid and less restrained than they had been in front of the court. Political marriages are not unknown in Zenturi culture, but typically they occur between allied houses, not enemy species. Which is exactly why it would work, Elena pressed, sensing an opening. No one would see it coming. It would force both sides to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the other. It would also make me appear weak to my own people. A queen who marries her prisoner rather than executing her. Elena shook her head. Not weak. Visionary. The ruler who chose innovation over tradition when tradition wasn't working. Zeratil stopped pacing and fixed Elena with that intense stare. And what makes you think such a marriage could be anything more than political theater? The question hit deeper than Elena had expected. She found herself thinking about the conversations they'd shared, the moments when the Queen's carefully maintained facade had slipped to reveal someone startlingly human in her loneliness and doubt. Because you're not what I expected, Elena said honestly. The intelligence briefings painted you as this cold, calculating tyrant. Instead, you're someone who cares so much about making the right decision that you're willing to question everything, even when it's inconvenient. And you are not what I expected from a Federation military officer. What did you expect? Arrogance, inflexibility, the kind of mindset that sees every problem as something to be solved through superior firepower. Zeratil moved closer, her luminous eyes studying Elena's face. Instead, you speak of hope and connection and finding ways to break cycles of hostility. Maybe that's a good foundation for our partnership. Partnership, the Queen repeated softly. When did you last have a true partner, Captain? Someone who shared your burdens rather than simply following your orders? Elena thought about it and realized the answer was depressing. Never, really. Military command is pretty lonely. 43 years of absolute authority tends to discourage equal relationships. They stood facing each other in the vast throne room, two people who had somehow found themselves discussing marriage while the fate of civilizations hung in the balance. Elena was acutely aware of how surreal the situation had become. This is insane, she said aloud. Completely, Zeratil agreed. But conventional wisdom has led us to the brink of mutual annihilation. Perhaps insanity is worth attempting. There would be complications. Legal frameworks to establish, cultural integration to negotiate, not to mention the small matter of actually stopping the synthesis. The synthesis threat provides perfect justification for unprecedented cooperation. A joint military command structure, shared intelligence networks, combined research initiatives. Elena felt excitement building as the possibilities expanded. Your technology, our adaptability. Zenturi precision, human improvisation. It could work. It could actually work, Zeratil said, and there was wonder in her voice. The sound of approaching footsteps reminded them that they couldn't remain alone forever. The Queen's advisors would demand answers, and those answers would shape the future of both species. I should warn you, Elena said with a grin that felt only slightly hysterical, I've never been married before. I might be terrible at it. Neither have I, Zeratil replied, and her smile transformed her face in a way that made Elena's heart skip. We'll learn together. So that's a yes? That's a yes to saving our species, preventing a catastrophic war, and possibly creating something unprecedented in galactic history. The Queen paused, her expression growing softer. As for the rest, we'll see where it leads. The throne room doors opened to admit the anxious advisors and guards who had been waiting outside. Elena watched their faces cycle through confusion, disbelief, and slowly dawning comprehension as Queen Zeratil announced her decision. 3 months later, as Elena stood beside her wife on the command deck of the Joint Task Force flagship, watching human and Zenturi vessels working in perfect coordination to destroy another synthesis probe, she reflected on how desperation could sometimes lead to the most unexpected discoveries. Any regrets? Zeratil asked quietly, her pointed ears catching the bridge lighting as she monitored the tactical displays. Elena looked at the mixed crews working together, at the shared technology that had already proven effective against the synthesis, at the woman whose partnership had become something deeper and more complex than either of them had anticipated. "Just one," Elena replied. "I wish I'd asked sooner." The Queen's laugh was soft and musical, and Elena realized that somewhere between desperation and hope, between political necessity and personal connection, they had indeed found something worth fighting for.